The 15-foot concrete wall went up overnight along my property line, blocking the sun from my workshop and casting a permanent shadow across half my yard. The developer who built it owned the newly completed hillside home next door. He stood on his balcony the morning after construction finished and told me the wall was within code and exactly on the line, as if that ended the conversation. It was tall enough to erase my southern exposure entirely, thick enough to look permanent, and placed with the kind of precision that signals intent. I didn't argue about sunlight. I own the parcel beneath my feet, and more importantly, I hold a recorded utility easement that runs 20 feet below grade across the shared boundary. It predates his subdivision by 30 years. When I reminded him that any permanent structure over that easement required accommodation for maintenance access, he smiled and said his engineers had taken care of it. They had. He'd driven 10-foot steel pilings down along the wall's toe, spaced tight enough to discourage excavation. Surface digging would be impractical. That was the point. The pilings weren't for structural necessity. They were insurance against challenge. I issued one clear warning. I told him that I intended to exercise my easement rights and install a new water service line to my detached workshop, and that any interference with lawful access could expose him to removal costs under the recorded covenant. Said I was welcome to try. So I pulled the plat maps. The easement language was clean. Ingress, egress, installation, repair, replacement of subsurface utilities, no depth limitation, no restriction on method. The wall sat directly over the corridor. I hired a licensed horizontal directional drill crew. HDD work doesn't require open trenching. The rig sets at an angle, bores under obstacles, and pulls pipe through along a guided path. It's commonly used under highways and existing structures where surface disruption is prohibited. We set the machine on my side of the yard, well clear of his foundation. The operator plotted a bore path that dipped 20 feet below the surface, then leveled out directly under the easement corridor, passing beneath the line of steel pilings. He watched from his balcony as the drill head disappeared into the soil. He looked unconcerned. From above ground, nothing moved. What he didn't account for was soil mechanics. Directional boring displaces and removes compacted earth to create a tunnel just large enough for conduit and waterline installation. The drill head advances, the remmer enlarges the path, and drilling fluid stabilizes the bore while carrying spoils back to the entry pit. In stable soils, compaction redistributes. In over-constrained soils pinned by rigid pilings, load paths change. We stayed within the easement. We stayed within permitted depth. Every inspection was documented. The bore passed directly beneath the wall's toth, the forwardmost portion carrying its shear load. The steel pilings prevented lateral movement at shallow depth, but they didn't extend 20 feet. Beneath that, the wall relied on compacted native soil to distribute weight. When the reaming pass widened the bore to accommodate the waterline sleeve, it removed more material along that horizontal corridor, not enough to create a surface void, enough to reduce bearing support under the toe. The city inspector signed off on the utility placement. The pipe was pulled successfully. The entry pit was sealed and compacted according to spec. From the surface, everything looked undisturbed. 2 days later, after a heavy irrigation cycle on his side of the property, the crack formed. It started at the midpoint of the wall, hairline and vertical. Concrete doesn't fail dramatically at first. It telegraphs stress. The pilings locked the upper portion rigid. The lower soil strata, now redistributed, began to settle differentially. I received a call from his project manager asking if we had hit something. I explained that we had installed a permitted water service line within a recorded easement at approved depth, provided the inspection record. Also reminded them that any structure built within the easement footprint assumes the risk of necessary subsurface access. The next morning, the crack widened. The wall leaned outward away from my property and toward his patio terrace. Structural walls derive stability from a combination of footing width, soil compaction, and shear resistance. By placing the wall directly over the easement corridor and then pinning it shallowly with steel, he created a rigid upper mass resting on soil that was no longer uniformly compacted beneath the toe. The irrigation cycle accelerated settlement. Water reduces effective stress in disturbed soil. The redistributed support gave way gradually, then decisively. The sound carried across both properties. A sharp report, like a snapped beam, followed by a grinding shift of reinforced concrete losing its bearing. The entire 15-foot wall rotated outward and collapsed onto his own stamped stone patio. It didn't cross the property line. It fell entirely on his side. No one was injured. The structure simply obeyed physics. Insurance became the next conversation. His carrier investigated immediately. They requested soil reports, construction drawings, and confirmation of easement records. The existence of a recorded subsurface utility easement complicated their position. The wall had been intentionally constructed within its bounds without accommodation for maintenance. My utility work had been lawful, permitted, inspected. The bore logs showed depth, angle, and path. Their engineer concluded that the proximate cause was inadequate subsurface support for a structure built over an active easement corridor. The claim was denied. He retained structural counsel and explored recovery options. The problem was standing. I had exercised a documented property right. There was no evidence of negligence, no deviation from permit, no trespass. The easement explicitly allowed subsurface installation and repair. The steel pilings he installed to prevent surface digging did not extend to the depth of the bore. They were irrelevant to the easement's vertical scope. Demolition of the fallen mass cost him substantially. Removal, haul-off, patio reconstruction, engineering reassessment. Contractor declined to rebuild in the same location without indemnification. The city's planning office issued a notice clarifying that any future construction within the easement corridor must include engineered accommodation for subsurface access or be set back beyond the recorded boundary. He eventually rebuilt 4 feet inside his property line and 8 feet lower. The sun returned to my workshop by mid-afternoon. My new waterline functions exactly as designed. I never raised my voice, simply used the rights already recorded under my name. Should a lawful easement protect only the surface or the full depth it was written to control? If you appreciate procedural enforcement stories like this, like and subscribe.